The people who change your life rarely arrive looking important. The autumn wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and damp pavement through downtown Cedar Falls as Ryan Brooks adjusted the worn backpack hanging from one shoulder and reached for his daughter Lucy's small hand before they crossed Maple Avenue. Their footsteps echoed softly against the brick sidewalks while shop windows glowed with warm golden light, displaying things they could admire but not afford. Ryan smiled anyway. He had learned years ago that a father's smile often fed a child's hope better than words ever could. Lucy skipped beside him, her brown ponytail bouncing with every step. "Daddy, are we still having dinner together?" she asked, trying to sound cheerful despite the quiet growl coming from her stomach. Ryan looked down at the paper bag tucked beneath his arm. Inside rested the only sandwich he had been able to buy after another long day of temporary construction work that ended 2 hours early because the contractor had run out of funding. It wasn't much. One turkey sandwich, one small apple, one bottle of water. Enough for 2 people if neither admitted they were still hungry afterward. "Of course we are," Ryan answered gently. "Everything tastes better when it's shared." Lucy nodded with complete faith, the kind only children possess before life teaches them to count what is missing instead of appreciating what remains. They settled onto a weathered wooden bench overlooking the small city park where crimson leaves drifted lazily across the grass. The fountain in the center burbled quietly, and somewhere nearby a street musician played an old country melody on an acoustic guitar that sounded slightly out of tune but strangely comforting. Ryan carefully unwrapped the sandwich, already planning how to divide it into equal halves, when he noticed someone sitting alone at the opposite end of the bench. A woman, perhaps in her early 30s, wore an oversized gray coat that looked several sizes too large. Her chestnut hair was loosely tied back beneath a faded knit cap, and although her clothes suggested hardship, nothing could completely hide the quiet elegance in the way she carried herself. She stared toward the fountain without moving, her hands trembling ever so slightly from exhaustion. She looked less like someone asking for help and more like someone who had forgotten what help even felt like. Ryan hesitated for only a heartbeat before standing. "Ma'am," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "Would you join us?" The woman slowly turned, surprised that anyone had spoken to her with kindness instead of suspicion. "I'm all right," she replied, though her voice carried the unmistakable weakness of someone who had gone far too long without a proper meal. Ryan smiled with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years choosing compassion over comfort. "Maybe," he said, holding out the sandwich, "but no one should eat alone if they don't have to." Lucy looked from her father to the stranger, then quietly reached into the paper bag, pulled out the small apple, and placed it beside the sandwich without saying a single word. The woman's eyes shimmered with emotion she struggled to conceal. She accepted the meal with trembling hands, whispering, "Thank you." Ryan simply nodded and opened the bottle of water, setting it beside her as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. None of them spoke for several moments. The breeze rustled through the maple trees while the fading sunlight painted the park in shades of amber and gold. To everyone walking past, they looked like 3 strangers sharing an ordinary evening. None of them could possibly imagine that by sunrise, the woman eating that simple sandwich would return to the top floor of one of America's largest food companies, where thousands of employees knew her by a very different name. Audrey Morgan, the CEO who had quietly disappeared weeks earlier in search of one honest soul. Audrey Morgan finished the last bite of the sandwich slowly, not because it was large enough to satisfy her hunger, but because it was the first meal in weeks that reminded her what generosity truly tasted like. Ryan and Lucy never asked for her name, never questioned why she looked exhausted, and never searched for anything they might gain in return. When the paper wrapping was folded neatly and placed into a nearby trash can, Ryan simply smiled. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Tomorrow always has a way of surprising us." Lucy gave a small wave. "I hope your tomorrow is really, really good." Audrey felt her throat tighten. She managed a grateful smile before watching them disappear down the sidewalk, their silhouettes framed by the warm glow of old street lamps. Father and daughter walked close together, laughing quietly about whether pancakes counted as dinner if someone believed in them enough. Audrey remained on the bench long after they had vanished. For the first time since beginning her journey across the country in disguise, She questioned whether she had misunderstood people or simply been looking in the wrong places. Nearly 4 weeks earlier, she had left the glass tower that bore her family name without security, assistance, or luxury. She had exchanged tailored suits for thrift store clothing and expensive leather shoes for worn sneakers. Every morning, she visited shelters, bus stations, neighborhood diners, and city parks, observing how ordinary Americans treated someone they believed had nothing. Many avoided eye contact. Some offered polite apologies before walking away. Others assumed the worst before hearing a single word. Audrey did not blame them completely. Fear often disguised itself as indifference. Still, each encounter quietly chipped away at the optimism she once carried as a young entrepreneur who believed success and kindness naturally belonged together. That belief had become harder to defend inside boardrooms, where quarterly profits mattered more than people. Her own executives often spoke about compassion during meetings, yet she had begun wondering how many would recognize it if it appeared beside them on a park bench wearing a threadbare coat. As dusk settled over Cedar Falls, a black sedan rolled silently to the curb across the street. The driver stepped out immediately, his expression a mixture of relief and professional restraint. "Miss Morgan," he said quietly, opening the rear door. "Everyone has been worried." Audrey nodded but did not rise immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the empty bench where Ryan and Lucy had shared their dinner. "Tell me something, Daniel," she asked softly. "How much would that sandwich have cost?" Daniel looked confused. "Perhaps $12 with tax." Audrey smiled sadly. "Interesting. $12 purchased something my company has not been able to buy with billions." Daniel waited respectfully. "What is that?" he asked. Audrey looked toward the darkening sky as leaves drifted across the quiet park. Proof that genuine character still exists. During the drive back, the city lights reflected across the tinted windows while Audrey remained unusually silent. Her tablet contained reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars awaiting approval, yet she ignored every notification. Instead, she replayed a single moment over and over in her mind. Lucy placing the apple beside the sandwich without hesitation. Children almost always reflected what they experienced at home. That simple gesture told Audrey everything she needed to know about the man raising her. Somewhere in a modest apartment across town, Ryan Brooks was likely convincing his daughter that they had enjoyed a wonderful dinner together. He would never know that the woman he had fed was returning to a penthouse overlooking the entire city. But Audrey knew something he did not. Tomorrow, she would begin searching for the quiet father who had given away his last meal without asking for recognition, because people like Ryan Brooks did not simply deserve gratitude. They deserved to be seen. The following morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight that spilled across Cedar Falls like quiet hope after a long night. Ryan Brooks was already awake before 6 o'clock, buttoning the same faded work shirt he had worn for years while carefully packing Lucy's school lunch. Peanut butter on 2 slices of bread, a handful of baby carrots, and a handwritten note folded neatly inside the paper bag. Every morning, he wrote something different. That day it read, "Kind hearts always find their way home." Lucy smiled as she discovered it and slipped the note into the front pocket of her backpack instead of throwing it away. She had kept every note her father had ever written. Across town, the top floor of Morgan Foods headquarters buzzed with polished shoes, ringing phones, and executives preparing for another demanding day. Audrey Morgan entered the boardroom wearing an elegant navy suit, her chestnut hair perfectly styled, looking nothing like the tired woman from the park bench. The conversation stopped the moment she walked inside. Everyone stood. Everyone except one visitor seated quietly near the back wall, an elderly gentleman with silver hair named Harold Ellis, chairman of the company's charitable foundation. He watched Audrey carefully as she took her seat. "Before we begin," Audrey said calmly, "I have one question. How many applications for community assistance did our foundation reject last month?" The room grew uncomfortably still. A vice president adjusted his glasses before answering. "Approximately 90%, based on financial priorities." Audrey slowly closed the folder in front of her. "Financial priorities," she repeated softly. Interesting phrase. No one spoke. Then she looked toward Harold Ellis. "I want every rejected file delivered to my office before the end of today." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen their chief executive interrupt a quarterly strategy meeting for something so unexpected. Meanwhile, Ryan spent the morning walking from one construction site to another after learning that another temporary contract had been canceled. At every stop, he thanked people for their time, even when they had nothing to offer except polite apologies. By noon, his boots had carried him nearly 4 miles across town. He stopped outside a neighborhood library where a bulletin board displayed handwritten job postings. Most required certifications he did not have. One small white card caught his attention. Maintenance technician. Morgan Foods Distribution Center. Full-time. Benefits included. Ryan quietly copied the address onto the back of an old grocery receipt before folding it into his wallet beside a faded family photograph. Unnoticed by him, a woman inside a parked sedan across the street lowered a pair of reading glasses and smiled. Audrey had hired a private investigator that morning, not to expose Ryan's weaknesses, but to verify whether the kindness she witnessed had been genuine. The report had surprised even her. No criminal record. No hidden debts beyond ordinary medical bills from his late wife. Years of volunteer work at a local church kitchen. Countless anonymous acts of generosity. The investigator had concluded with one unusual sentence. If this man has a secret, it is that he consistently chooses other people before himself. Audrey folded the report and noticed something tucked inside that had not been requested. It was a scanned copy of an old newspaper clipping from nearly 10 years earlier. The headline mentioned a local engineering competition. The winner's photograph had faded with age, but the young man smiling beside a prototype food preservation device looked unmistakably like Ryan Brooks. Audrey frowned. According to every employment record, Ryan had only worked as a mechanic and laborer. There was no mention of engineering, no patents, no university career. It was as though an entire chapter of his life had quietly disappeared. She slid the clipping into her notebook without mentioning it to anyone. Far across the city, Ryan reached into his worn wallet to place the job address beside Lucy's school picture. As he did, a tiny brass token slipped onto the sidewalk. He picked it up with a gentle smile before returning it to the hidden pocket where he had carried it for years. Stamped into the old metal were 3 simple words that no one else had seen in a decade. Keep your promise. Neither Ryan nor Audrey realized that those 3 words, preserved through years of silent sacrifice, would eventually reveal a truth neither of them was prepared to face. Rain drifted gently across Cedar Falls the next morning, leaving the streets washed clean beneath a blanket of silver clouds. Ryan Brooks stood outside the Morgan Foods Distribution Center 15 minutes before the hiring office opened, smoothing the wrinkles from his only button-down shirt. It was not new, and the elbows had begun to fade from years of careful washing, but it was clean, pressed, and worn with quiet dignity. He glanced at the folded grocery receipt in his wallet one last time to confirm the address before slipping it back beside Lucy's school picture. Please let today be enough, he whispered to himself, not as a demand, but as a simple prayer. Inside the towering headquarters, several miles away, Audrey Morgan stood before a wall of security monitors. Most displayed loading docks, warehouses, and office entrances. One camera showed applicants beginning to gather outside the distribution center. Her assistant stepped beside her carrying a tablet. Human Resources is ready to begin interviews, Daniel said. Audrey nodded without taking her eyes off the screen. Do not tell anyone I asked to monitor today's applicants. Daniel hesitated. Including the hiring director? Especially the hiring director. She wanted the day to unfold naturally. Kindness deserved truth, not staged opportunities. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lobby doors opened. Ryan entered quietly, removing his old baseball cap before stepping inside. The polished floors reflected bright overhead lights, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the waiting area. Around him sat younger applicants in tailored suits, scrolling through phones or rehearsing polished introductions. Ryan simply folded his hands and waited. A receptionist offered a polite smile before handing him a clipboard. Please complete the application, sir. Thank you, Ryan replied warmly. He took a seat and carefully filled in every line with neat handwriting. When he reached the section asking about higher education, he paused for only a moment before writing a single word. None. He did not mention the engineering competition. He did not mention the newspaper clipping Audrey had discovered. Some dreams, he believed, belonged to another lifetime. Upstairs, Audrey noticed the hesitation through the live camera feed. Zoom in, she said quietly. The technician enlarged the image until the application became barely readable. Audrey could not see every word, but she noticed Ryan leave several achievements blank before placing the clipboard on the receptionist's desk. She frowned. Most applicants exaggerated their accomplishments. Ryan seemed determined to hide his. Before she could think further, another scene unfolded. A middle-aged janitor pushing a supply cart accidentally dropped a heavy box of cleaning towels near the entrance. Several applicants looked up briefly before returning to their phones. Ryan stood immediately. "Let me help you with that," he said. The janitor smiled gratefully. "You do not have to." Ryan knelt anyway, stacking each folded towel neatly back into the box before wheeling the cart safely against the wall. "Looks like these belong somewhere more useful than the floor," he joked softly. The old janitor chuckled. Neither man noticed the security camera capturing every second. Audrey smiled without realizing it. Daniel looked toward her. "Should I move him directly to the final interview?" Audrey slowly shook her head. "No. If I interfere now, I will only learn what happens because I am the chief executive. I want to know who my people are when they believe nobody important is watching." Minutes later, the hiring manager entered the lobby with a folder tucked beneath his arm. His name was Curtis Harlan, a respected supervisor known for efficiency and impossible expectations. He glanced quickly across the waiting room before his eyes settled on Ryan's worn shoes and weathered shirt. Curtis lowered his voice just enough to remain polite while still allowing nearby applicants to hear. "Maintenance interviews require dependable workers with current technical experience," he said. "Some positions are more competitive than people expect." Ryan met his eyes calmly. "I understand. I only asked for the chance to earn the job." Curtis gave a restrained nod before moving to the next applicant. Across the city, Audrey watched the exchange in complete silence. The room around her remained still, but deep inside, she sensed something beginning to unfold. She had started this search believing she was looking for one extraordinary man. She was beginning to realize she was also discovering the true character of everyone else around him. Ryan waited nearly an hour before Curtis Harlan finally called his name. The interview room was simple, with gray walls, a metal table, and a wide window overlooking rows of delivery trucks lined up beneath the cloudy afternoon sky. Curtis remained standing as Ryan entered, flipping through the application with practiced efficiency. "Please have a seat, Mr. Brooks," he said. Ryan thanked him quietly and sat with his hands folded neatly on the table. Curtis scanned the paperwork again. "You have solid work history as a mechanic and general maintenance technician, but I noticed there are several employment gaps." Ryan nodded. "After my wife passed away, my daughter needed me more than any employer did." Curtis looked up briefly. "You chose fewer hours." "I chose to be there when she came home from school." The answer lingered in the room longer than either man expected. Curtis continued reading. "You also left the education section almost blank." Ryan smiled faintly. "Because there is not much to write." Curtis tapped the application with one finger. "That is not entirely true." Ryan remained silent. "I found an old engineering competition listed in a public archive while verifying your employment history. You won first place almost 10 years ago." Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "That was a long time ago. Why leave it off?" Curtis asked. Ryan looked through the window toward the warehouse floor where dozens of employees quietly performed their jobs. "Because I am not applying to become the man I almost was. I am applying to become the man my daughter still needs." Upstairs, Audrey watched every word through the secure conference feed. Daniel stood quietly beside her. Neither spoke. Curtis leaned back in his chair. "Your prototype reduced food waste during transportation by nearly 20% according to the article." Ryan gave a small shrug. "Ideas are only useful when someone can afford to build them." "Did anyone offer to buy it?" Curtis asked. Ryan hesitated for the first time. He reached into his wallet, removed the old brass token stamped with the words "Keep Your Promise," and gently turned it between his fingers before placing it back inside. "Someone did," he answered softly. "But life changed before anything came of it." Curtis noticed the emotion Ryan quickly hid behind his calm expression. "You regret it?" Ryan smiled with quiet peace. "Sometimes I miss the dream. I never regret the choice." The interview paused as silence settled comfortably between them. Outside the window, a forklift moved slowly through the loading yard while rain tapped softly against the glass. Curtis closed the application folder. "One final question. Why Morgan Foods?" Ryan answered without rehearsed confidence. "Because everyone deserves work that lets them sleep with a clear conscience." Your company feeds families across the country. If I can help keep that work moving, even by repairing machines or sweeping floors, then I will know I earned my paycheck honestly. Several floors above, Audrey felt an unexpected weight settle in her chest. She quietly opened the scanned newspaper clipping again. There, beneath the faded photograph of the young engineering champion, was the name of the sponsoring company that had promised to fund Ryan's invention years earlier. Her expression changed instantly. Daniel noticed. Is something wrong? Audrey slowly placed the article beside an old corporate history book from her shelf. The sponsor listed beneath Ryan's smiling photograph was Morgan Foods Research Division. The project had been canceled shortly after her late father became chief executive during a major round of budget reductions. Ryan had never mentioned it. He had never blamed the company. He had simply walked away from the dream that might have changed his life forever. Audrey closed her eyes for a brief moment, realizing the quiet man sitting in a warehouse interview room was unknowingly asking for a maintenance job from the very company that had once buried his future. Curtis Harlan closed the interview folder and offered a courteous nod before standing. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Brooks. Human Resources will contact you after we complete the remaining interviews. Ryan rose with the same quiet composure he had carried into the room. Thank you for your time, he replied sincerely before extending his hand. Curtis accepted the handshake almost automatically, but something about Ryan's steady grip and calm eyes lingered after he walked out the door. There was no desperation, no bitterness, only the quiet confidence of a man who believed that doing the right thing mattered even when no reward followed. Ryan stepped back into the lobby where the afternoon crowd had grown thinner. Several applicants had already left after receiving polite rejections. Others sat nervously checking their phones. Ryan slipped his worn wallet back into his pocket and started toward the exit. On his way out, he noticed the elderly janitor from earlier struggling to replace a flickering ceiling light near the reception desk. Without interrupting, Ryan walked over. Would you mind holding the ladder while I tighten that fixture? The janitor asked with an embarrassed smile. Not at all, Ryan answered. Within a few minutes, the loose electrical connection had been secured. The light glowed steadily again. The old man laughed softly. You were interviewing for maintenance and ended up fixing the building before they even hired you. Ryan chuckled. It needed fixing. That seemed reason enough. Neither of them realized that another security camera quietly recorded the exchange. Upstairs, Audrey watched the monitor without blinking. Around her, the executive conference room remained silent. Several department heads had gathered for the afternoon operations meeting, but no one dared interrupt the chief executive as she continued watching Ryan walk through the building. Finally, she spoke. Tell me something. The room turned toward her. How many of our managers greeted that applicant by name today? No one answered immediately. Daniel glanced down at the visitor log. Only the receptionist and Mr. Harlan. Audrey nodded slowly. Interesting. A company that claims people are its greatest asset failed to notice one of the greatest people who entered the building. Across town, Ryan arrived at Lucy's elementary school just before dismissal. Children rushed through the front doors carrying backpacks almost as large as themselves. Lucy spotted her father immediately and ran toward him with a bright smile. Did your interview go well? She asked hopefully. Ryan knelt beside her. I did my best. Do you think you got the job? She asked. Ryan gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. Sometimes the answer comes later than we want. That does not mean it is the wrong answer. Lucy accepted that explanation with the uncomplicated trust only a child could possess. As they walked home, she slipped her small hand into his. Can we stop by Miss Evelyn's house? She asked. Her mailbox was leaning over yesterday. Ryan smiled. Of course. 20 minutes later, father and daughter stood outside the small white house of their elderly neighbor. Ryan quietly straightened the broken wooden post while Lucy gathered scattered letters from the grass and placed them neatly inside the repaired mailbox. Miss Evelyn opened her front door just as they finished. You two have already done enough for this neighborhood, she said gratefully. Ryan simply tipped his head. Neighbors take care of neighbors. Back inside Morgan Foods headquarters, Audrey sat alone in her office after everyone else had gone home. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows while the old newspaper clipping rested beside Ryan's employment application. She reached for another folder that had remained sealed for years, one marked Legacy Projects. Inside was the cancellation report signed by her late father. As she turned the final page, a handwritten note fell into her lap. It was addressed not to the board, but to the unknown inventor whose proposal had never been funded. The letter had never been mailed. Audrey unfolded it slowly, and before reading the first sentence, she noticed the signature at the bottom. It belonged to her father. Whatever those forgotten words contained, she knew they were about to change everything she believed about her family's past and Ryan Brooks's future. The handwritten letter rested quietly in Audrey Morgan's hands as dawn painted the skyline of Cedar Falls in soft shades of gold. The paper had yellowed with time, and the ink had faded slightly, but every word remained clear. To the young engineer whose proposal deserved more than I was able to give, it began. Audrey read slowly, her heartbeat growing heavier with each sentence. Her father admitted that Ryan's food preservation system had been one of the most promising ideas the company had ever reviewed. Budget reductions had forced difficult decisions, but there had been another reason the project was quietly set aside. The board believed the invention would reduce the demand for several profitable product lines. Her father had disagreed, yet he had been overruled. The final paragraph stopped Audrey completely. If circumstances ever allow, I hope Morgan Foods finds this man again. Character like his cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Audrey lowered the letter and stared through the office window. Her father had carried that regret for the rest of his life. She quietly folded the page and slipped it into her notebook beside the old newspaper clipping. Across town, Ryan was repairing a loose cabinet hinge in Lucy's bedroom before walking her to school. She watched him tighten the final screw and smiled. "You always fix everything." Ryan laughed softly. "Not everything." Lucy tilted her head. "You fix the things that matter." He looked at his daughter for a long moment before answering. "I hope so." As they reached the school entrance, Lucy hugged him tightly. "Do not worry about the job today, Daddy. If they do not choose you, another place will." Ryan kissed the top of her head. "That is a pretty wise thing for an 8-year-old to say." She grinned proudly before disappearing through the front doors. Less than an hour later, Ryan's phone rang while he was helping unload donated boxes at the neighborhood church pantry. "Mr. Brooks," a professional voice said, "this is Human Resources from Morgan Foods. We would like you to return this afternoon for one additional meeting." Ryan thanked the caller without asking questions. He assumed another interview remained. He had no reason to imagine anything unusual. Shortly before 3 o'clock, he arrived once again at Morgan Foods headquarters. This time Daniel personally greeted him in the lobby. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks. Please come with me." Ryan followed quietly through polished hallways and into a private executive elevator. He glanced at the gold-numbered buttons with mild surprise, but said nothing. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor where sunlight poured through walls of glass overlooking the city. Employees passing through the corridor immediately straightened their posture as Daniel escorted Ryan toward a pair of tall wooden doors. Inside the executive boardroom, nearly 20 senior leaders had already taken their seats around a long polished table. Conversations faded the instant Ryan entered. He paused respectfully near the doorway, uncertain whether he had stepped into the wrong room. Curtis Harlan looked equally confused. Daniel simply smiled. "Please wait here." A quiet silence settled across the room. Then the doors behind the chairman's chair opened once more. Audrey Morgan entered wearing an elegant cream-colored suit, her chestnut hair neatly styled, carrying only a slim leather notebook. Every executive rose to their feet immediately. Ryan looked toward the woman leading the meeting. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. For a single suspended moment, the boardroom disappeared. He no longer saw polished marble floors or expensive artwork. He saw only the lonely woman sitting beside him on a weathered park bench with trembling hands wrapped around a simple sandwich. Audrey stopped walking. Their eyes met across the room. A gentle smile touched her face, the same grateful smile she had worn beneath the old knit cap days earlier. Around them, no one understood the silence growing heavier by the second. Finally, Audrey spoke, her voice calm and warm. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks. I have been hoping we would meet again under my real name." The room froze. Curtis slowly turned toward Ryan. Several executives exchanged bewildered glances. Ryan remained perfectly still, the memory of that quiet evening returning all at once as he realized the hungry stranger he had fed with his daughter's last apple was standing before him as the chief executive of the entire company. No one moved. No one reached for a notebook. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed to disappear as every pair of eyes shifted between Audrey Morgan and Ryan Brooks. Ryan stood with the same calm posture he had carried into every difficult moment of his life, but behind his steady expression memories were quietly falling into place. The tired woman on the park bench, the grateful smile, the trembling hands accepting half of a sandwich and a small apple from his daughter. Audrey took one slow step forward. "You did not recognize me," she said gently. Ryan smiled with quiet honesty. "I was not trying to." A few executives exchanged puzzled looks. Audrey continued walking until she stood only a few feet away from him. "You never asked my name." Ryan nodded. "Someone who is hungry needs food before introductions." Silence settled over the room again. Curtis Harlan lowered his eyes. Daniel quietly folded his hands behind his back. Audrey turned toward the board members. "Every one of you has reviewed resumes, financial reports, and performance charts this week. Yet the most important lesson this company has received came from a man carrying his last meal home to his daughter." She paused before looking back at Ryan. "I spent 4 weeks traveling without anyone knowing who I was. Hundreds of people saw me. Very few truly saw me." Ryan answered softly. "Sometimes people are carrying burdens we cannot see either." Audrey smiled. "Exactly." She opened her notebook and carefully removed the faded newspaper clipping along with the handwritten letter from her late father. She handed both to Ryan. He accepted them with quiet curiosity. As his eyes moved across the old article, recognition slowly returned. Then he unfolded the letter. His breathing became slower. He read every line without speaking. When he reached the final sentence, he gently closed his eyes for a brief moment. There was no anger, no triumph. Only a peaceful sadness for the years that had passed. "I never knew this existed," he whispered. Audrey's voice grew softer. "Neither did I until yesterday." Ryan looked up. "Your father owed me nothing." Audrey shook her head. "He believed he owed you an apology." Ryan carefully folded the letter along its original creases before returning it to her hands. "Then I accept it." Several executives stared in disbelief. No demands, no accusations, no attempt to revisit the past. Audrey searched his face, almost expecting disappointment or resentment. Instead, she found the same quiet dignity